In the year marking a decade of the Syrian conflict, regional normalization efforts with Damascus gained steam while an economic downward spiral pushed 90% of Syrians into poverty. At the same time, with Bashar al-Assad controlling around 70% of the country's territory, the two stalemates in the northeast and the northwest seem to have settled in a fragile stability. In 2021, the Turkish president's threatening rhetoric over a possible intervention in northeast Syria, controlled by the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, has been as constant as the breaches of the ceasefire. With these tit-for-tat attacks, things can go wrong, but Turkey is aware that there is no military solution in the northeast. Russia has drawn a red line that any further Turkish intervention is not going to be accepted, and for Turkey to do something, it does need a Russian green light. Another complicated dance is the one of the SDF. Their most preferred partners, the US and the Biden administration, has insisted they will not withdraw their troops from the northeast. Despite their preference, the SDF has kept open the door to Moscow and Damascus, even as the deal that Russia has put on the table is a surrender of everything that the SDF has gained over the past 6 years. In 2022, it's expected that the SDF will encourage the US to push for political settlement with the government for the progress on the UNSC 2254 resolution. This is a recognition that the SDF thinks that the conflict at large has come to a frozen point, and now is the time to push for diplomacy. It is forecasted that the status quo will prevail for now, but in the long run, the Kurdish position could be seen as precarious. It is plausible to think that Damascus will wait it out and one day the Americans will go. It may take 5 or 10 years, but Damascus will still be here. It's a waiting game. Despite constant breaches during 2021, the ceasefire appears to be holding in the northwest, controlled by the opposition forces and the Islamist fundamentalist group Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. Even though the ceasefire is being violated on an almost daily basis, that situation suits almost everybody far better than any of the other alternatives. This messy status quo is almost likely to continue. The alternative, a full-fledged attack by Damascus on the area, seems unlikely. Turkey has continuously expanded its presence. The likelihood that this would lead to a direct confrontation between Turkish and Syrian troops is quite high, and the Russians are not interested in that. A massive attack would translate into thousands of people seeking safety in Turkish territory. A clearly marked red line for Ankara is the northwest remaining stable, that is, no threat of refugees crossing the border. An operation by Damascus could also lead the jihadi fighters currently in the northwest, many of whom come from former Soviet Union countries, to spread, creating a nightmare scenario for Russia. HTS, the group in control of Idlib, has consistently tightened the screws on other groups that may carry out attacks on their own account. HTS seems not to be interested in any kind of escalation. Also, HTS's willingness to consider opening unofficial trade crossings with the government indicates HTS's interest to consolidate the existing status quo to deter any military escalation. HTS, a designated terrorist group by the UNSC, has been trying to rebrand itself after severing ties with ISIS and Al-Qaeda years ago. In 2021, 267 Daesh attacks in northern Syria caused 183 fatalities, marking a decline from the 572 attacks and 299 deaths in 2020. Despite this trend, there are concerns about the likelihood that ISIS has used the last 12 months in Syria to quietly reconstruct its finance and logistical networks to a stage where they are able to conduct more sophisticated attacks. Since ISIS's territorial defeat in Baghouz in 2019, around 10,000 suspected ISIS members linger in prisons in eastern Syria. The futures of the 16,000 ISIS member families in northeast Syria's Al-Hol camp have been thrown into limbo amidst an ISIS resurgence in the camp that resulted in more than 95 killings in 2021. It is pointed to solid speculations that this year the SDF has started to drag its feet, put additional bureaucratic barriers in the way of governments who openly want to bring their citizens back. Because if large numbers of Westerners are repatriated, the reasons for continued Western investment in the Northeast will start to decline and they will lose political leverage. The death of the cross-border mechanism. With 60% of the population of Syria being food insecure and 13.4 million in need of humanitarian assistance, aid delivery is beyond critical now. Last July, the use of the Bab al-Hawa crossing in the northwest to deliver aid to Syria was renewed for 6 months. Due to Russia's strategical profits and security, it will try to discredit the expected UNSC resolution and mechanism, if not veto it altogether. If there is any disruption on the cross-border mechanism, the lives of over 3 million people will be at risk. The push for normalization. Normalization efforts with the Assad government intensified in 2021. Jordan fully reopened the Jabr border crossing and resumed flights to Damascus. The UAE's foreign minister visited Damascus to discuss commercial partnerships. And Interpol, whose president is now an Emirati general, reintegrated Syria back into its information exchange network. Eyes are on the Arab League summit in Algeria in March 2022 for a possible return of Damascus. It's unlikely that the idea of Arab powers playing nice with Damascus to get them out of the Iranian embrace would work, given that the Syrian government owes them, the Iranians, their survival. The Reconstruction. In September 2021, the Syrian Minister of Industry made a call for investors to rehabilitate destroyed factories. This call highlights the depth of despair of the government and points to the trend of privatizing the public sector in a similar fashion to the Yeltsin era in Russia, where oligarchs gobbled everything for low prices. This is already happening in Syria. It is doubted that any investors would be willing to invest the enormous amount of money that it would need to rebuild Syria's infrastructure and risk being affected by the US Caesar sanctions. Unsafe returns. In 2021, Denmark, deeming Damascus and its countryside safe for return, revoked dozens of residency permits of Syrian refugees. Besides safety concerns, another practical obstacle for return are the violations of housing, land, and property rights. Since 2011, there have been dozens of laws and decrees issued by the government that make dispossessing very easy, particularly for individuals that are seen as opposition. The accountability path. In 2021, the Koblenz trial delivered the first verdict against the Syrian government's crimes against humanity. Former Syrian Secret Service agent Ayad A was sentenced to 4.5 years in prison. The other defendant, Anwar R, is accused of supervising the torture of 4,000 prisoners, and his verdict is expected in 2022. In 2022, a decision is also expected by the International Court of Justice to open or not an investigation on the Syrian government for gross human rights violations under the Convention Against Torture as requested by the Netherlands and Canada.